In other words, the things that you have to value less than the things that somebody else has, and vice versa. In other words, all exchanges rely on a disagreement of value. Example with my morning breakfast, which I wish I wasn't dwelling on so much. But when I exchanged my $5.61 to McDonald's for coffee and a couple Egg McMuffins, the reason that exchange took place was because McDonald's places a higher value on my money than they value their own goods, and I value their goods more than I value my own money. And because we have a disagreement about these valuations, we can go into an exchange. And if you flip the example around a little bit, if nobody ever disagreed about value, like if we all thought that value that a good had was the exact same as everybody else, we would never exchange them with somebody else, right? If McDonald's thought that their Egg McMuffins were worth the exact same as I did, why would they trade them to me? Or if they valued them the exact same as the money that I gave them, they would never get rid of the Egg McMuffins. They'd be happy just staying with the money. So we need this disagreement of values. We need these reverse preferences to actually enable trades to take place. Now I want to give you maybe a more deep example of how this process takes place. So imagine that you have 3 buyers or potential buyers of a good. We know they're going to be buyers or they're potential buyers of coffee. Oh, there it is. We know they're potential buyers of coffee because the coffee is in parenthesis. So that's something that they don't have, but they do have money. And these 3 people, buyers A, B, and C, have the value scales as follows. So A would rather have $5 than 1 coffee, but he'd rather have a coffee than $4. And so now you can see what he would be willing to pay to get a coffee. I mean, he would never pay $5 for coffee because he values that more than the coffee. But if he could find a coffee for $4, he'd buy that. Or if he could find a coffee for less than $4, rather, he would buy that because the coffee is more valuable than the $4. So, for example, if you went out and McDonald's was selling coffee, no, McDonald's is cheaper than this. If you went to, who's got expensive coffee? Starbucks, I guess. What's a Starbucks worth now? $5.50. Ooh, yeah. Listening. The rest of you lot, on the other hand. Let's say you go out and you find a coffee for $3.50. For this person, fantastic, because they valued the coffee more than $4, so if they find one for $3.50, great, scoop it up and buy it. And we have our 3 buyers, and they have their value scales as follows. So you can see that each of them is a little bit different. They're hard to compare, but some things we do know, and what we do know is what they'd be willing to pay for a coffee at a maximum. And at the same time, these people are met by 3 sellers, X, Y, and Z. And the 3 sellers have coffee because coffee is not in parenthesis, but they have reverse preferences to the buyers. At least some of them have reverse preferences to the buyers. So seller X here would rather have $3 to a coffee, but he'd rather have $2 than a coffee at the same time. He'd rather have a coffee than $2. So if he could find somebody out there who would pay him more than $2 for a coffee, fantastic. He'd scoop it up. $2.50, we've got a sale. And these 3 sellers in the marketplace can meet with these 3 buyers and see if there are mutually advantageous exchanges. In other words, see if there are exchanges where they have reverse preferences, where one of these sellers can get rid of a coffee and give it to a buyer in exchange for money that the buyer has that they can pay the seller with. And maybe the easiest way to do this is to construct supply and demand schedules. Actually, just out of curiosity, who's taken an economics class? About 2/3, let's say. So this is pretty standard in economics classes, but I'll note some differences later on in the lecture. So our quantity demanded is, of course, how many units of a good the buyers are going to demand at any given price. So notably, nobody is willing to buy a coffee for $5, since $5, the person who comes closest is buyer A, but even he would rather have $5 than a coffee, so nobody wants to pay $5 for this. And as we go down the price scale over here, we see more and more units of coffee are demanded. So when we get to $3, buyer A, he prefers a coffee more than $3. Buyer B, she prefers a coffee more than $3. Buyer C does not, since $3 is higher on the value scale. So we're left with 2 buyers or 2 quantities demanded of coffee at that price of $3. And if we go down the sellers, X, Y, and Z, we get the exact opposite relationship. So at a price of $5, how many sellers are willing to sell a coffee? All of them. because all of them place that coffee that they have above a monetary value of $5, and the person who comes closest would be seller Z here, but even he would be willing to get rid of his coffee for $4, so he's in there. So all three of them are willing to sell their coffees for $5. And then as the price drops, we see that more and more of these sellers remove units from offer, or they remove some of the quantity that they have from being supplied. And when we get down to, let's see, $2, well, only one of them wants to sell or is willing to exchange away their coffee if somebody offers them $2, and it's seller X, since X is the only one who places that coffee above $2 on his value scale. And then if somebody came and offered $1 for coffee, of course, nobody values a coffee above a coffee below $1, so we have zero quantity supplied here. And the nice thing about these two schedules, the quantities demanded and supplied, is that taken together, they allow us to see the process of price formation. Now, of all these prices, only one can really exist on the market. If coffees were selling for $5, we'd have an economic problem, and the economic problem is that many people, all three, want to be selling their coffees, but nobody's willing to pay $5. Nobody values coffee enough to actually go out there and buy it. So all of these sales are not actually going to have buyers to go along with them. And of course, if sellers don't have a buyer to go along with them, no sale takes place. So what do the sellers do in response? If you're smart, you start lowering your price a little bit. So I want to sell my coffee for $5, but I have no taker, so I'll drop my price from $5 down to $4. And all of a sudden, when I drop it from $5 down to $4, one of these buyers enters the market, buyer A, as the case may be. But the price is still not right because there's too many quantities being supplied in this market still for the available amount of demanders. So we have an excess of supply. And the suppliers are going to keep dropping their price until the amount supplied on the market or the amount offered on the market is exactly equal to the amount demanded. And at that price, everybody's happy. At $3 here, everybody who valued a coffee more than $3 traded their $3 to get a coffee. That's buyers A and B, incidentally, since those are the two who value coffee above $3 on their value scale. Buyer C here does not. And he's okay with it. He's okay with the fact that he didn't buy coffee for $3 because he's happier with the $3 than he would have been with the coffee, so that's fine. And at the same time, at the price of $3, all the sellers are happy as well. Because, for example, seller X would rather have a coffee than, seller Y, for example, would rather get rid of his coffee than $3, and the same with X. And so taken together, we can see that the quantity of two is set equal to each other at that one market price of $3. And so we have the process of price formation that stems directly from the value scales of all of the individual buyers and sellers interacting with one another in the market. Now, this only raises the question of what the cost is that people actually had to pay when they exchanged these goods. And oftentimes, it's simple to think about costs in strictly monetary terms, like accountants. If you ever took an accounting class, costs are the historical monetary value incurred to buy something or to exchange for something. But the Austrian economist has a much broader view of cost. We consider it as the best foregone alternative that you couldn't pursue if you decided on one course of action. And we call this the opportunity cost. So, for example, it could have been money in nature. When I bought my Egg McMuffins this morning and I paid $3 for them, the $3 could have done something else. Like what do you get for $3? Almost a whole Starbucks coffee, I guess. You get a small one, which is like, what do they call it, a tall? A small. And for that $3, I could have went and got a coffee. So the cost for me to go and get my 2 Egg McMuffins was I did not go and get a Starbucks coffee. It's the money, but it's really what that money could have done for me. Or how about things that don't have a monetary cost associated with them? Like you guys are all sitting here right now. You didn't pay for it, or you didn't pay to walk in this door anyway. So what is the cost for you to sit here? Well, it's whatever you could not have done. And if we go back to that value scale at the beginning of the lecture that I showed you, attending this lecture for 45 minutes, that was your most highly valued alternative. And then right under there was sleeping for an hour, I guess. So for you to attend this lecture, the opportunity cost, the thing that you could not do, was sleeping for an hour. And now all of a sudden we're able to value goods and determine costs much more comprehensively than if we just narrowly focused on money. Now we can value and assign costs to a whole slew of non-monetary transactions or exchanges. The exchange taking place right now of me speaking and offering a lecture and you all listening and enjoying a lecture, hopefully as the case may be. Now, Professor Salerno commented briefly at the end about different orders of goods. And one of Menger's great contributions was to assign an ordering system where we can refer to goods and where they exist relative to a final want satisfaction. So, for example, Rothbard gives an example in Man, Economy, and State where he says, imagine that you're hungry and you want a ham sandwich. And the ham sandwich is the final good, or what Menger would have called the lowest order good. It's a consumer good that's going to alleviate your hunger. But there's all sorts of input factors or higher order goods that are necessary in order to create this ham sandwich. You need bread, you need lettuce, you need ham, and butter if you're one of those people, and things like that. And you combine all of these higher order goods together in order to produce the lowest order good. But the question becomes, well, how do we assign value to these higher order goods? And Professor Salerno talked about this a little bit, but I want to give you a different spin on it. The value of a higher order good is a cost associated with it. Like if you're going out to buy a ham sandwich and you go to the grocery store, the higher order goods are the bread, the butter, and the ham and lettuce, let's just say. And those are costs that you're going to have to incur in order to produce the final good, the lowest order good of the ham sandwich. So how is it that we assign a cost, or a value, if you will, to the input factors, the higher order goods that actually produce the ham sandwich? Well, through what we call value imputation. So you value a ham sandwich according to where it falls on your value scale. And according to that value you place on the final good, you will have to impute back to all of the higher order goods that will allow you to realize that ham sandwich value to them. And it's really a nice and very unique way of looking at the price process that the Austrian economists have. It's drastically different than mainstream economists have. And I want to give you, just to illustrate the point, since quite a few of you have taken an economics class. In economics, if you've taken the class, there's always this tension because economists, mainstream economists, they think they're subjective about value because every economics class, if you take, it starts with creating a demand curve very similar to the way that I derived our demand schedule here. And it's subjective. They say you value a good according to your wants that you have, and you're willing to pay so much for a certain good, and we're going to create a demand curve, and that's your demand side of the model. And then economists say, well, the supply side of the model is also important because suppliers have to meet demanders. But what determines the supply side of a model in economics, or is the supply of a good in economics? Cost. It's the cost of production. It's the marginal cost of production in particular. And so we've got costs interacting with preferences in mainstream economics to determine prices and quantities bought and sold in the market. And mainstream economists, at least at the principles level, would adhere to the fact that, no, I mean, the price formation process is subjective because your preferences are subjective. But then they bring in these costs through the supply side and muddy the waters a little bit. And then when you get to your intermediate micro class, your intermediate economics classes, if anybody's taken that level yet, it becomes a thoroughly cost-based theory of prices because preferences get thrown out, they throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they say, well, in the long run, costs, the price of a good, the value that you place on it has to fall down to whatever the cost of production is for various reasons that I'm not going to get into. But I'll give you an example, a vignette maybe to illustrate it. I live in Madrid, Spain, and Madrid is a city of 6 or 7 million people. I'm not going to build it up all that much. It's a pretty great place. 6 or 7